Okay, everyone, it's 1 o'clock, so I'd like to welcome you all to the Interdisciplinary Conservation Seminar Series hosted by the Human Environment Systems Group at Boise State University. My name is Matt Williamson, and I'm an assistant professor here. I'll be your host for most of the rest of the semester. Before we get started, I just want to orient you to a few logistics. First of all, the session is being recorded. You'll get an email at the same email address you used to register with the link. They're also being hosted at the Boise State College of Innovation and Design's YouTube channel. So if you're looking for it and you can't find the link, that's where they'll be. You're going to be muted for most of the presentation. And also, we ask that you turn off your cameras just to make the streaming go a bit smoother and avoid any major lags. We'll hold questions till the end, but you're welcome to post your questions in the chat at any time, and I'll make sure that Sarah gets a chance to address them when we get to the end. You can find the rest of the schedule and register for all the future webinars at the link here on the Human Environment Systems page at Boise State. You'll also find the link to the videos there as well. Lastly, I just want to acknowledge that between the pandemic, the fires raging across most of the West, and a summer of pretty intense racial violence, we're probably all showing up in very different places. I'm going to ask that you just take a minute to be as kind to yourselves and to others as possible, and let you know that we really appreciate you being here. It's also, I'm also really grateful to be able to introduce Dr. Serra Hoagland of the Laguna Pueblo in central New Mexico. Dr. Hoagland serves as the liaison officer and biologist for the USDA Rocky Mountain Research Station Fire Lab to the Salish Kootenai College in Pablo, Montana. Prior to joining the Rocky Mountain Research Station, Sarah worked as a biological scientist and the tribal relations co-point of contact for the USDA Southern Research Station in Asheville, North Carolina. As the first Native American to graduate from Northern Arizona University with a PhD in forestry, Sarah studied Mexican spotted owl habitat on tribal and non-tribal lands in south central New Mexico. She's heavily involved with the Intertribal Timber Council, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, as well as the Wildlife Society. We're really grateful to have Sarah here today, and I'm looking forward to her talk. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for the introduction and the welcome. And hello, everyone out there in the digital world. I'm assuming that I'm coming through loud and clear, but Matt, again, feel free to interrupt me at any time if you can't hear or whatnot. But again, welcome everybody, and thanks, Matt, for the introduction. I'm so happy to be here today and present on tribal natural resource management. I've got a long presentation here, and let's just get started. So first, again, thanks, Matt, for the introduction. I'm actually born and raised in Northern California in Placerville, which is off my reservation in New Mexico, but they're experiencing like these fires we're talking about. And I went to Cal Poly for my bachelor's in ecology, and then I went to UC Santa Barbara for a master's in environmental science and management. And my thesis was on oak woodland ecology and management. And then I ended up going to Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, which is actually where I met Matt. And I did a PhD in forestry, and I'll talk a little bit about my research that I've done. So that's sort of me. And I guess in 2017, I relocated from Flagstaff up here to Montana. And I'm presenting here from the Flathead Indian Reservation, which is in northwestern Montana, and it's home to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And I'm based here at Salish Kootenai College. And I'll just give a quick shout out to SKC, because SKC is the only tribal college and university in the United States that offers a 4-year degree in forestry and in wildlife and fisheries and in hydrology. So it's the place to be to recruit Native students in natural resources. So I'm really thankful for my job here. I quite literally have my dream job. I get to work with Native students. I get to conduct tribally relevant research, and then do all those intertribal partnerships and collaborations that Matt had mentioned in my introduction. So really just, again, want to say thanks for allowing me to be here today and present. So I'll be talking about tribal natural resource management, which I see as a good model for environmental stewardship. This first figure that I have on my screen, this is actually from the Curve Lake First Nation in Canada. And I just will highlight some of these things. You know, the medicine wheel describes things like our sacred plants that we use for ceremonies, different animals, different stages of our lives, different times of the day, different seasons. Important things are all intertwined in here. And I wanted to use this for the first slide because although it might kind of sound cliche, but truly Native people see things as highly connected and sort of reliant on each other. And I really like this because it did incorporate a lot of things related to the environment and wildlife. So just wanted to start with that. And I wish that we were all meeting in person today because when I do talks like this, I bring books into the classroom and I have some of them here with me today. Not as many as normal because I'm in the process of moving, but a couple of the books that I have today, I'll share just a couple of segments from, but I wish we could be together today, but this is, I guess, as good as it gets right now. All right, I also like to start my talks off with a land acknowledgement. And most of the talks that I do lately are at University of Montana there in Missoula. And so this, if you've been to the Missoula area, this is actually the Missoula Valley. And this is a photo of some of the Salish and Pend Oreille people. And so to, you know, do a land acknowledgement, the whole point is to just offer some respect to the people who have been there before and who still exist today, who see these lands as very sacred to them, their whole community. This particular areas where they gathered camas, and this now is the location of University of Montana's school. So it has drastically changed from then till now. And I'll just exit out of the screen really fast and go to what I'd like to point out is the Tribal Connections viewer here. And I'm sorry, so if you Google, if you ever want to do a land acknowledgement, this is one easy way to do it. Just type in Google, type in Tribal Connections, and some of the results that will pop up are up here at the top. So the Forest Service actually published this resource. And so when you click on this, it will bring you to just an overview of it. But then the following link gives you access to the online ArcGIS viewer, where you can click on anywhere in the United States and it will bring up the Royce maps. So that tells you sort of those, the treaty areas that different tribes had. And I zoomed in, sorry, I can't see my browsers as well, but I zoomed into your university. Can you still see it, Matt?
You gotta share the browser screen. It's on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let me do that. So stop share, new share. Sorry, everyone. New share, browser. There we go. And Boise, your campus there is located, can you see that now? Yep, so when you click on anywhere on the map, it brings up the tribes that have ancestral territories in that area. So your university there is on the lands of the northwestern band of the Shoshone from Utah, and then the western Shoshone of Nevada. So that's just one resource that I wanted to point out. And again, the land acknowledgements are a great way to just sort of pay respect to the people who have been there before and in today's times too. All right, so this is what I'd like to talk about today. First, I'll share a brief story about this species.
Can you share your PowerPoint again?
Yes, I'm trying to. Sorry. Okay, let's do this. Share screen. All right, how's that? Can you see that now?
Yep, we're back.
PowerPoint. Okay, great. Sorry about the Zoom hiccups. I take full responsibility for those mistakes. But these are just the things I want to talk about today. One, share a little bit about this first species, and without using your iPhone or your Google browser, try not to look up what the species is, but if you know the common name of the species, type it in the chat box. It'd be great to see if someone knows this. I'll talk a little bit about tribal natural resource programs, define what we mean by all our relations, touch a little bit on TEK. Great, it looks like we have some folks. And then kind of end with a call for action for environmental professionals. All right, so I'm guessing, are there any guesses to what that species was? Matt, do you see any guesses?
Lewis went with Roadrunner.
Hey, way to go, Lewis. Dude, if I was in the classroom, I'd run over and give you a high five. Nice job, Lewis. So yes, we are talking about the Roadrunner. So the Roadrunner is such a fascinating species. They can run up to 15 miles an hour. They are part of the cuckoo family. They prey upon things like, in this picture, lizards and small insects, mice and things like that. They primarily exist in the desert shrubland communities in the Southwest. Some of the threats that they experience are cold winters that can have an impact on their prey base, and which we all probably know, habitat destruction is a big thing too. So primarily their populations in Southern California have been impacted pretty harshly due to habitat alteration and fragmentation and destruction. But for the most part, the Roadrunners are actually doing okay. What's interesting is they don't have a ton of research on them. There've been a fair amount of studies that have been published back in the 70s on the species, but it's not as prolific of a species in terms of the literature about them. They have a really interesting mating display where actually one of the birds will grab something like a stick and sort of place it in front of its mate as sort of like a gift. And what else? So, you know, they actually can attack and fight rattlesnakes. And so there's some really interesting videos online. I've seen videos of them grabbing hummingbirds out of the air, like when they're feeding around their feeders. These birds are just phenomenal and really interesting. Here's their habitat distribution. They're primarily in Mexico as well. And they're just absolutely beautiful birds. But I wanted to open up with this story about the Roadrunner because my family is the Roadrunner clan. And although Roadrunners as a species are likely not in decline, they're of least concern on the red list, you know, my people, my family are in decline. And one cultural story I'll share about them is that they're zygodactyl, and so they have 2 toes in the front and 2 toes in the back. So their track kind of creates this X mark in the sand. And as some of the stories go, is that X mark is supposed to ward off bad spirits that are kind of from the underground world, in that they deceive them. You can't really tell which direction they're going, either forward or backwards. So they're sort of like creating that confusion with their tracks. So I just want to start off with that story just to emphasize the point that wildlife are seen as our relatives for Native people. And in fact, we're named after them. And in a lot of our creation stories, the animals came first before all the people. And even from like an evolutionary perspective, that holds true as well. But in our stories, we're sort of the last species to come along, and we're kind of the floundering, like young toddler that doesn't really like know how to live in the world. And it's interesting because there's a lot of parallels with what we see today. But what the lesson is we're supposed to learn from those who have come before us. And so we're supposed to watch them. And there's a lot of practices that we use today that we've over time developed by watching animals and learning from them. So I just want to start off with that story. And again, congratulations to the student who correctly answered it. Thank you for participating. All right, so now just to move on to some of the tribal natural resource management programs. This is just a kind of pop question. I'd like to, be able to engage with you all normally, but maybe you can just think in your head, how many acres do tribes manage? And just maybe think of a ballpark figure. How many acres do you think tribes manage today? And if we think about historically, tribes manage from coast to coast, right? Across the board. And this is a unique project that was done a couple of years ago by a Native student who actually looked up all the and contacted all the tribes throughout the US and asked for their native name for their own people and has mapped them out. And I can't remember the name of the scholar, but I should have put it up here because they did a fantastic job with this resource. But today, now these are the reservations that tribes occupy today. So their land has shrunk significantly. Tribes manage and operate on 56 million acres of land, which is about 2.3% of the contiguous 48 states. And if you think about that in relation to how much land the US Forest Service, like my employer, manages, they manage 193 million acres. But when you combine that together, you know, that's a little bit over 6% of the landscape. So there's a huge conservation potential here as far as the footprint that tribes manage. And as far as the resources that they manage, they have significant timber resources. So 18 million of that 56 million acres is commercial forest that tribes manage. Tribes own 30% of US coal resources and 40% of uranium, and then about 4% of oil and natural gas. And so one thing that I'll share just from the first book that, again, if we were in person, I'd love to bring this resource. This is from my tribe. This is a photographic history that was put together. It's a beautiful resource, so if anyone wants to purchase this, it's fantastic. But I'll just read the first paragraph from the insert here. It says, in the course of centuries of exposure to outside influences, Laguna has been ingenious and adaptable in maintaining Pueblo culture. Like in other pueblos, the Laguna people integrated the Roman Catholic faith of the Spanish conquistadors into their native religious practices. Later, the Lagunas negotiated a contract with the railroad to build tracks across their land in exchange for salaried jobs. Contact with the outside world eventually led to the building of highways across the reservation and the discovery of uranium and subsequent mining on Laguna land. And just to talk a little bit about my family history, I mean, that's exactly accurate. And so my mom's uncles and that generation, like my grandparents' generation, were hired by Santa Fe Railroad. And there was a railroad that sort of bisects our reservation just outside of Albuquerque there. And so much so that it brought a lot of our people from Laguna to Barstow, which is a huge connection point for the Santa Fe Railroad. And they actually established a Laguna colony there in Southern California. And my mom has stories of quite literally growing up in a boxcar. And so the Laguna have worked a lot with different nations. Also, it talks a little bit about the Spanish influence down there and the impact that it has had on some of our culture and our practices. But that's just a brief overview. One other thing that I always enjoy doing is when talking about land base and what tribes manage is I like doing this exercise, just highlighting that there is a significant difference in how tribes manage their lands. And so I'll show you a series of 4 photos, 2 of which are on the reservation and 2 of which are on an adjacent national forest. And this is a really fun Google Earth exercise if you haven't done it before. But I'll show you these first couple photos. So here's one. And again, this is either a reservation or a national forest. And I'll say this is in the Southwest. This is right across the boundary. And again, it's either a reservation or a national forest. And then these next 2 are from Washington. And again, this is either a reservation or a national forest. And then here's its sort of counterpart, just right across the boundary. So you can see looking at these photos, and I don't know how many of you love landscape ecology like I do, but you can really tell that there is a significant difference between the 2, right? And so if anyone wants to take a guess at which are which, feel free to populate it in the chat box. And I'll give you just a second to sort of look at them here. But to spoil the surprise, and I don't know if you see my, Matt, do you see my mouse when I'm moving it right now? Do you see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so this upper left photo here, thanks Matt, is a reservation. And this is on the Mescalero Apache Indian Reservation. And then just right across the boundary, this is the Lincoln National Forest. Okay, So a big difference in tree density, stocking density, all kinds of things. Right over here on the right-hand side, up at the upper right, this is the Yakima Indian Reservation. So this is in eastern Washington. And then right on the other side of that is the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. So same thing, tree density is different, but then really these sizes of the cuts are different. You can really tell a difference. These are the same spatial resolution and everything. But the whole point of this is just to go to show that there are differences between how tribes manage their lands and adjacent landowners. Some stats about Indian country: there are over 572 federally recognized tribes. I think the number now is all the way up to 574, as I think it was the Little-shelled Chippewa here in our region that just got recognized, and they've been fighting for that for, I think, nearly half a century. Some of the laws and policies that impact tribal natural resource management: tribes still have to follow NEPA, they still have to follow the Endangered Species Act. And then I wanted to emphasize the Secretarial Order 3206. And this is a law that came into play right around the early and mid 90s when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was trying to put critical habitat or delineate critical habitat on tribal lands in the Southwest for the owl. And of course, it led to a little bit of pushback from the tribes. And what this Secretarial Order 3206 now says is that tribes are not to bear a disproportionate burden for the protection of threatened and endangered species. And it also allows them the ability to create their own biological assessments and management plans, habitat conservation plans for teeny species. Tribes also have their own tribally established laws, like they have their own teeny species lists. They have their own laws and policies that they follow, that they set for themselves. So tribes are still following some of those regulations. As far as tribal natural resource management goes, as far as governing bodies, some tribes are 100% ran by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is under the Department of Interior, where that's sort of the federal government provides all the support, all the capacity, all the technical, know-hows to do the management. And then some tribes are on the other end and used the Indian Self-Determination Act, Public Law, I think it's 92-638, to then compact all those roles and responsibilities of the federal government to themselves. So they had to show the right capacity and leadership and staffing and funding and all that stuff to then have it so that they can manage all those programs. And then there's also a combination of both. So some tribes have forestry under the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and some have it where water development projects or EPA type projects are ran by the tribe. So it's all across the board. There's no one model fits all. So there's a huge difference in how each individual tribe goes about it. These are all the other laws and policies and acts that tribes are held to or can be or can apply to. So the whole point is to not read each one of these, but there are a lot of other acts that are out there, and we could teach a whole class on Indian law and policy, but we're not going to do that today. All right, so moving forward, most of the habitat management is guided by TEK and Western Science through an integrated resource management plan that typically is approved by either the department, the Secretary of Interior, or their tribal council. And this includes things like managing forests for cultural purposes or culturally significant or medicinal plants, things like long rotations and integrative and holistic type of thinking. And then many of the above things are identified by tribal elders. And the one thing that also distinguishes, I think, especially tribal forestry, is that tribal forests are held to the sustainable yield and uneven age management guidelines. The Forest Service is held to multiple use guidelines. So those are two kind of different things that do play out into how management is done on the ground. Tribes do rely on the income from their natural resources to maintain their economy. And right now, like for instance, and maybe we can get into this during the question period about the impacts that COVID has had on things like forest products and tribal mills and tribal jobs. It's been rough, to say the least. But this last point down here, IFMAT stands for the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team. The first report was done in 1993, and the second was done in 2003, and then the third was done in 2013. And this is a congressionally mandated assessment looking at the status of tribal forests every 10 years. So this next report will be coming out in 2023. But what we found in the past 3 reports is that tribes must live with the consequences of their actions, and that they are very concerned about protection and subsistence. But just to touch a little bit about wildlife, this is from a report that came out, or a web posting from New Mexico, talking about tribes being leaders in wildlife management. And one of the quotes I'll just share is from a colleague and friend of mine, Aaron Johnson, who works as the wildlife program manager for the Southern Ute tribe. And he says, in this region, you can't really talk about wildlife management or wildlife movement without bringing the tribes into that conversation. Tribal lands and tribal wildlife management programs are critical to keeping wildlife populations like big game healthy and viable. And so what does it mean to say all of our relations? The way to best describe this is kind of how we learn in some of our evolution and ecology classes through the phylogenetic tree, and that we're all related. We all have a common ancestor. There's a way to track how, the fish on here is related to the plant and the earthworm and the ant and things like that. So when we say all our relations, we mean all the things that we are related to, all of our ancestors, all the things that have come before us. And I just want to share one thing from this book. This is a fictional book from an author in Canada from the First Nations. And I just really liked this. I read it last night, and I figured I would share it today because I like adding some creative pieces into the talks here. I just got to find it though. I didn't bookmark it. Okay, so it's chapter 20, the Human Manual, and I'll just read same thing, one quick paragraph from this. The difference between us, between one human and another, is probably one DNA base pair in every 1,000. What does that mean? I can say with great certainty that you and I were born from women. We look up at the night sky and we see the same stars, the same moon, breathe and sleep and pray and work and daydream and sing and cry and fight and love. But in the end, our bodies are meat. They rot in the ground or burn in the fire or are pickled in their own casings, displayed like waxed fruit for family and friends to weep over. Our bodies are vessels built from recycled carbon, like every other living being on this planet. Bits and parts of you have probably been a cricket or a dinosaur or a single blade of grass on the prairies. With all the power of technology and science in the world, I bet you dollars to donuts that you still trust a human face to be a human. But come closer and let me speak to the creatures that swim in your ancient oceans, the old ones that sing to you in your dreams. Encoded memories so frayed you'd think that they were extinct. But they wait, coiled and unblinking in your blood and your bones. So I just wanted to share that in relation to what we mean by all our relations. A little bit about TEK, and I did mean to share these slides with Matt, so if folks do want to look more into some of these definitions, you're welcome to, and no need to write them down now. But here are some definitions of TEK, a spiritual and culturally based way in which people relate to instructions from ancient times on how we're supposed to live within an ecosystem, the reflection of cultural norms and practices that influence how we steward and coexist in the environment. And I think the paper that I shared with Matt for today talks about some of these things, but the similarities between the two They both really improve our understanding of the world and are based upon repeated observations, right? And they both can help us understand ecological systems, and they have broad applications in natural resource management. And in many ways, it's a little awkward to talk about TEK through a computer to everybody. I mean, ideally we would probably like go visit the Navajo Nation and talk to the grandmother out there about the monsoons and the forage that her sheep are able to eat. Or we would go to Tule River and talk to the youth that have an immense amount of knowledge about the giant sequoia trees and the fire regime. They're standing next to a big fire scar underneath a giant sequoia. Or we go talk with Jim Wolf here from the Eastern Band of Cherokee, who unfortunately has passed away, but he knew so much about different tree species and then the understory species that they would use for foods and medicines. Or we'd be like here locally in Montana with some of the Salish elders and talking to them about bringing fire back to the landscape. So TEK is very place specific. It's really hard to do an overview of it through a webinar like this, but I just wanted to at least introduce some of these topics. And this is a table from the reading that, again, I believe I supplied, and this is from Mason et al. In 2012 that was published. And this just does a nice job kind of comparing and contrasting the two, but I often think that they are highly complementary and kind of, it's almost like seeing with two eyes. All right, let's see, I'm gonna keep moving on here. One quick thing that we did back in, I think this was probably about 2014, is we asked some of the tribal wildlife managers in the Southwest about how they incorporate TEK into some of their management decisions. And so this is just some highlights from that survey that we did. And so how often do they incorporate TEK? Many of them said sometimes, usually, and a small portion of them said always. Another one of the questions we asked is, are TEK and Western science used together in the same decision or planning document? And a majority of them said yes. And I'll just end with one quote here on this TEK section, which is from my friend and colleague, Larry Mason, who was on that IFMAT team and is a retired professor from University of Washington. He is non-native, but he said, we have an immense amount of cumulative Western scientific information and knowledge to do anything, but without wisdom, it's a crapshoot. And I just really like that. And I feel like it kind of summarizes how we, I think, should be blending and integrating these two. All right, so a couple slides here on working in Indian country. And I talked about this in the abstract. You know, it does require a lot of patience, a lot of humility, active engagement, and then what we sort of call the 4 R's, which is respect, relationship, relevance, reciprocity, representation, and responsibility. And if any of you are at all interested in like maybe starting a project with a tribe, or maybe working for a tribe, maybe trying to leverage grants and incorporate some tribal knowledge or anything like that, you know, one great resource to look at is here at Salish Kootenai College, we have started an Indigenous Research Center, which is funded by a NSF grant. And at SKC with the Indigenous Research Center, we have all kinds of podcasts that we've been publishing, and it's of using all these other Native scholars throughout the nation, kind of honing in on some of these topics and how to use Indigenous research methodologies to approach some of our most pressing questions. And so there was an article that was just published through Native Science Report, and you can look at it here on this link, and we talk about listening first. All right, so lastly, I'll just talk briefly about kind of a case study that I did with the Mescalero Apache tribe for my dissertation in New Mexico. And that's exactly what I did, as I just went there and listened first. I was fortunate enough to be a student observer on a tribal site visit, and I had had some experience working in that area 2 years before, so I was pretty familiar with the geography and some of the forest health issues that were going on. And so I got to visit with the Mescalero Apache on this site visit, and basically spent 3 days with them, hearing about their concerns and their needs and the things that they really needed to help improve their management. And what they ended up honing in on and using in the text of the tribal resolution that approved my project was they were interested in knowing the range of habitat conditions that the owl would occupy. And they felt like they had continued to manage owl habitat even after the listing of the species. And they really wanted to bring their neighbors on board and sort of show that range of habitat conditions that the owl would occupy. And so the biggest threat to the species that I ended up studying, the Mexican spotted owl, is large, high severity, stand replacing wildfire. And that's just since the last a little bit over or under a decade. This is now the primary threat. When it was first listed, it was lack of specific management direction that protected its nesting and roosting habitat. And the owl is a really interesting species. I wish I could do a show of hands and see if any of you have worked with the spotted owls before, but they are cool birds. They're actually unique in that their wings, like the physical design of their wings, are most like an ultralight. So if any of you are familiar with aviation and flying, they are very short, stubby, but complex wings. And so they can navigate some of that habitat with high horizontal and vertical structural diversity. And so they can ease in and out of that late successional stands. But and they also need that cover to protect them from overflying predators like goshawks and other predatory birds. And so the owl has totally evolved, at least the spotted owl, to these really late successional complex forest stands. But you know, as an ecologist, you can think, well, those areas are also highly susceptible to fire. And so that's what's kind of happened over the last 20 years is these places are now really susceptible to fire. And so the biggest pressing question is, well, how are they going to respond to fire and moderate levels of thinning and things like that? And so the tribe had continued to do the thinning after the management of the species. And so that's kind of where I came into play. And so here's just a brief map showing you the distribution of the 3 species. The northern is listed as endangered. The California is actually still just a state listed species, and I think they're trying to get it listed as threatened, the last I saw. And then the Mexican spotted owl is listed as threatened. And you can see its habitat is sort of fragmented throughout the Southwest, but most of it is in Mexico. And so what I did for my dissertation is I tried to summarize 4.5 years worth of work on one slide, and here you go. Here's the one slide from 4.5 years of really hard work. But what I tried to answer for the tribe is if we could identify owl habitat from space, and then if owl habitat was in fact different on tribal lands or not. And what I found is that yes, we could identify it from space, and yes, it was significantly different than its adjacent landowners. And that's partly due to some of the management that they had continued. So the other interesting piece to this, though, is the selectivity of that habitat was similar on both landscapes. So the owl still saw the forest types as like certain preference levels. So they still liked it the same, regardless of what side they were on. But the availability was in fact different. The other question I really tried to answer with our research is we used what we call the customized NDVI product, which was really just like customized to that location and that area. But what we wanted to know was, does habitat selectivity correlate with owl reproduction? And maybe in your head you can kind of think what might be the answer to this question, but to describe it a little bit more is it's asking, you know, if they have this high preference for these sites, and I used to call them the like embassy suites and like the Hilton of the owl nesting sites, you know, those highly preferred areas that they preferentially selected for, did those sites also have higher fecundity? And maybe you can think in your head what you might guess. But what's interesting is we found that no, it didn't relate. It was totally across the board and totally random. So, you know, they'd also be nesting in sort of the no-tell motel, like Motel 6, and reproducing just fine. So it was really interesting that the habitat, especially their preference and the selectivity that we came up with, it really didn't impact their fecundity. And there has been some other studies that also have shown that it's really a matter of the prey base total biomass for that season that can impact the fecundity overall. And they're really a boom and bust, like cyclical reproducing species. So that was really interesting and caught us off guard. The last thing that was sort of interesting, and particularly interesting to the tribe and the Fish and Wildlife Service now, is we tried to look at the stand structure of these tribally managed owl breeding areas. And what I found is that, you know, the trees per acre, the total tree basal area, the canopy cover, things like this, all those attributes, they didn't always match the recovery plan recommendation. So even though it didn't quite fit the vision of desired nesting conditions of what the Fish and Wildlife Service says in the recovery plan, owls were there and they were still reproducing. So it really led to some interesting work, and I'm continuing the work. There's a short link there that you can look at some of the published research from it. So I did want to touch on that because I like talking about that specific project. You know, there's a lot more to it, but boy, it was interesting, and I'm so thankful to continue working with that tribe because in so many ways we've learned so much. And I think that this is just the cusp of us really starting to continue engaging with tribes and learning a lot more from how they've managed their landscapes. So I'm looking at my time. I don't have a ton more time left, but I do want to, because I did mention in my abstract that I was going to talk a little bit about recruitment and retention of Native students. So I'll just show some of these things here. So if Boise State is really interested in getting more Native students into their programs, these are some things to think about. And I'd be happy to also share these slides too if anyone's particularly interested. But the first thing is we have to recognize that Native students in their communities have gone through a lot. So much so that it's created so many barriers over the years that it's, I'm blown away that we are still here. It's really unfortunate the trauma that tribal communities have gone through. But I do want to say that there's a huge investment opportunity. Right now, Native enrollment at large colleges and universities is on an upward trend. And this is data from the past IFMAT report that I talked about before. But you can see this is, I should have blown this up, I apologize. This is data from showing Native student enrollment over 2004 to 2011. And this is from, I think, 86 institutions that offer natural resource related degrees. And that top red line is fisheries and wildlife. And then the bottom green is forestry. So that's forestry is kind of staying stagnant, unfortunately, but fisheries and wildlife and environmental science, we are seeing an increase in that. So that's really good. And these are just some quotes from some colleagues who work a lot with Native students in STEM and just talking about the caliber of the students that they're seeing coming through is just phenomenal. So one last thing, Natives do have a very different way of thinking about the natural world, which can result in a clear understanding of land stewardship. So this is a paper from a little while ago, but they summarized almost 400 stories from different news outlets, and they saw these themes arise. And then lastly, a paper from Unsworth, Native American children tend to have a highly sophisticated understanding of nature, characterized by complex reasoning about the interrelationships in nature, and I totally think that that's true. So with that, I'll just fly back to my last screen here and end so we have time for questions. But my challenge to you as future environmental professionals is one, help increase tribal recognition in tribal landscapes by doing things like as simple as land acknowledgments, or if you're traveling to a certain area, pull up that resource and see whose lands you're traveling to and where you're going to as a visitor. Two, consider working for a tribe. We need you. So many different tribes, need new aspiring leaders who are considerate and sensitive and well-educated on all these topics. So we need you. Come work for tribes. Exit your silo and be vulnerable. And I personally think that this is definitely the most, or our biggest opportunity to learn is when we're really vulnerable. And just lastly, recognize that your purpose and your profession might be protecting somebody's ancestors. and really take that to heart and ask yourself regularly, am I being inclusive? And with that, I'll just end with a picture of, this is me here standing in the forest, this little teeny tiny figure. This is at Mescalero. This is in the dry season, but once the monsoons hit, this place turns into like a tropical rainforest with grasses 3 feet high, and it's just super moist. So this is where I get to spend my summers hooting for owls. And just wanted to end by saying thanks again to Matt, and I'm happy to, I guess, transition and take some questions. So thanks.
Unmute myself so you can hear. There's a lot of fun things happening in the chat. Just as a reminder for folks, we're going to do questions. You can either click on the participants button at the bottom and raise your hand, or turn your camera on and I will know that you want to ask something. I do have a question from Rihanna, which is, what is the best way to find jobs with tribes?
Yeah, great question, Rihanna. Thank you. So the best way to do that, so it's kind of challenging because, again, there are 570 plus tribes. So most tribes will have their own like job listing website. So if you are really, aspiring to work in a particular area, I would say just look up the tribes in that area and their websites and see if you can see any job postings. And then you can also look at through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA. They have a ton of job postings too. I will note that the BIA, because their whole purpose is to serve tribes and provide services to tribal communities and Indian peoples, that they do have what's called Indian preference. So they prefer to hire Native people to work in Native communities. But if there's always a really good chance that, I would say even 50-50 right now, the employee ratio of the BIA is probably 50 Native and then 50 non-Native. So you can also find jobs there at the BIA. But do note that they do have an Indian preference. So there might be a tribal member who gets a job, but that's a good thing. So yeah, look at the tribal websites. And then I think, one other group to kind of key in on is through the Wildlife Society, we have the Native Peoples Wildlife Management Working Group, which is a mouthful, but our working group is free to students to join, and you don't have to be Native to join. But when you join that working group, we have all kinds of newsletters that come out, and we do a lot of job postings through that group. So check out that working group, the Native Peoples of the Wildlife Society. Thanks for that question.
Sarah, can you send me the contact information for that? I can send that around to folks after the...
Oh, of course, yes. Yes.
I'm gonna take a second and look across the pictures and make sure nobody's turned their camera back on.
Oh yeah, maybe I'll turn mine on too. I'd like to see everybody.
It looks
I don't have boogers in my nose.
Callie has a question, it looks like.
Yeah, could I ask one? Thank you, Sarah, again for your presentation. That was really wonderful. I was wondering if you could expand on the availability that you talked about with owls and that differences on the two lands.
Yes, yeah, totally. Okay, so yeah, the availability was in fact different. What we saw was, and this part, great question, by the way, Callie. And so this relates to a couple different things, but what we saw is that there was more of a white fur habitat component, which is the like embassy suites of owl habitat. There was more of that available on the adjacent landscapes. But what you look at when you look at it like from an elevational perspective, the reservation is kind of in a little bit of a bowl, and the two highest peaks are actually on the adjacent national forest. And so that white fir, one, it needs more of those wet sites and higher elevation areas, and the tribe had more of this Douglas fir type habitat because it sort of sat about, on average, 1,000 feet lower than the nesting sites on the adjacent landscape. But the other component of that is the National Forest has sort of done a hands-off management since the listing of the species, and white fir in particular is much more shade tolerant than Douglas fir. So over time, if you kind of let a forest just like do its thing, over time, those more white fir will be coming through and sort of taking over some of those areas. So one, it was due to the elevational gradient and sort of that moisture gradient. the topography, but I also think that there was this management component too in there, in that the white fir is really this late successional species. So that's sort of what we saw. But great question. I'm glad I could talk a little bit more about that. Thank you. I love stand dynamics. So if you love stuff like that, dude, stand dynamics is like the coolest class ever.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really
Yeah.
There's another question in the chat, and then Jody, I see you got your camera on. So Sean asks, how many students graduate from Salish Kootenai College, and what are some of the best ways to recruit them into our graduate program?
Yes, exactly. Great question. So the students that graduate from SKC, I would say every year in natural resources, we probably have, so it's a small school, I'll say that. We only have a total of, at maximum, maybe 800 students a year. And that's across all of our different departments. But within natural resources, in every given year, we're about anywhere from, I don't know, 50 to 80 students. And so every year we probably graduate like 10 to 15 students. And yeah, as far as getting them there, boy, I think one thing like what we're doing at University of Montana is we just have faculty from come visit and talk to our seniors who are graduating and just see if there's a connection between their research interests and you know, what they want to study. And so that would be one quick way. Once COVID is over, come on over and I'll host you guys. I would love to see that. You know, there's also, I think, like institutional agreements that they're trying to create. Like I know University of Idaho, we're trying to create one between SKC. So it's more of like a bridge program. So we know that their credits will apply and things like that. So if we want to go more like institutional level, maybe some of those agreements might be something to think about. Good question.
Fantastic, thanks. Jody, you have a question?
Yeah, hi Sarah. Thanks so much for giving us a talk. The short version of my question is, how does tribal land management work? And the long version of that question is like, if on one end of the spectrum we have private land management, where you have like a single landowner making all the decisions about what to do. And then on the other end, you have like the U.S. Forest Service, where you have some person in Washington who identifies a mandate, and then the people below them kind of carry out that mandate. Like where on that spectrum does tribal land management lie?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you're talking more like hierarchically, like the decision making kind of, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like who decides what the priorities for that forest is, and then how is that implemented?
Excellent question. I'm so glad you asked this, Jody. So I guess I could generalize it. So even though all of the tribes are different, and so what I'm going to say as an answer, it might not always fit, but what I see generally is those decisions are really made by the tribal council, which those are, for the most part, elected officials from their community, like the different villages or the different chapters, like for the Navajo Nation. So they're elected officials that, with input from the natural resource managers, are the ones that kind of go with the guiding, this is how we're going to do it. And this is our vision. This is our goals and objectives for these areas. So it's sort of in collaboration with mainly the tribal governing body, which generally is the tribal council, and then with the expertise from those different departments. But maybe I'll just say one other point where I thought maybe your question was going was the model between like a private landowner, where it's sort of a one person in charge, one vision. It's pretty simple that way, right? Like you don't have to like go out and do a survey of all your neighbors asking, well, what do you want me to do with my land? Like it's pretty simple to define for one landowner, right? And then versus the Forest Service, it's all in public trust. So it's every single one of us as United States citizens and taxpayers that have a say in how the forest manages their resources for the Forest Service and the BLM and all these other federal lands. Us as US citizens have a say in that. So we all are equal stakeholders in those guiding those management decisions. But for tribes, this is what creates, I think, the distinguishing factors. For tribes, their stakeholders are just their tribal members. Truly, that's it. So it's the people who live in that place, who are connected to that place, who have family from, millennia, they've evolved in that place in some cases. Some tribes have been removed, but so it just creates a totally different stakeholder population, I guess. And so in many cases, like I said in that screen, is tribes really are intimately tied to the environmental management decisions that they make because they're there to stay, right? Versus in the Forest Service, we can have somebody from New York or LA commenting on what's done here in Montana. So it's a totally different model, and I think it does create more that local leadership. So sorry, that's a long-winded answer to your question, Jody, but I hope I answered it.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
There is sort of a related, or I'd say a related question from Lauren in the chat. She says, I'm curious about the relationship between tribal leaders and the BIA to develop resource management plans together.
Yes.
Sounds like there's a lot of variation in collaboration. Can you speak about how that process works, or maybe doesn't always work?
It doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. Oh my gosh, this is a great but loaded question. And so actually boy, we could talk about this for a long time, but I will just point you to those IFMAT reports because that's exactly what we're looking at. We're in this exact question. So every 10 years, we're looking at exactly this. Is the BIA actually serving individual tribal visions for each of the federally recognized tribes? And yeah, sometimes it's a good fit and sometimes it's not. And yeah, there's a huge variation in collaboration. It's interesting. You get comments from across the board, but truly, I think the BIA is actually, so I have some sympathy for the BIA because they're put into probably one of the hardest jobs out of any federal agency. And boy, it has been such a challenge. But what I've noticed and what we've seen over the 100 years since the BIA has been in operation is there's a lot more closer, like honing in on meeting tribal objectives and goals over time. In the past, it was pretty terrible, and it's slowly starting to get better. And that's one, it's due to more actual Indian people working for the BIA, which is why they have that Indian preference clause in there for their hiring, and they're the only federal agency, other than like veterans preference, that we can use through our hiring practices. So yeah, that's a tough question. I wish we had more time to really get into that. But if you want, check out those IFMAT reports, and you can really nerd out on some of those things because they are congressionally mandated questions that we are tasked to answer every single 10 years.
I don't know if Lewis has turned on his camera because he wants to gloat about getting the Roadrunner question right, or because he has a question, but I'm going to assume it's because he has a question.
I do have a question, but I should admit that I had an unfair advantage because I grew up in Albuquerque and I am also mildly obsessed with Roadrunners. So.
Oh, cool. Aren't they cool? Awesome, that's great.
Yeah, so I guess kind of piggybacking off of Jody and Lauren's questions and kind of centering it on New Mexico. So, you know, looking at the tribal connections map, you know, especially in like the Rio Grande Valley, there's a lot of tribes that border one another in addition to national forests. And I guess I'm kind of curious whether you could speak to like whether there's collaborations or potentially conflicts and disagreement in terms of TEK and overall management plans and outcomes, like between or across bordering tribes in that region.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of a specific example, but none are really coming to mind. I guess one, is maybe Serra Hoaglund's work, and she was actually kind of my role model when I was going through school. Although she's non-native, she worked with the Western Apache tribes, looking at the reintroduction of the Mexican gray wolf. And I think what she ended up seeing is that there were some differences between how the tribes felt, even though they're sort of like in proximity to each other, like how they felt the wolf should be reintroduced. And so, yeah, there are some places where tribes individually can clash with each other on maybe not, I don't know about TEK. I guess maybe that I'd have to really think about an example for that one, but just with their values today. You know, some have slightly different objectives than others, so that can create a little bit of clashing. But you know, luckily there's a lot of intertribal organizations, and for the most part, tribes tend to work together on things to have a louder voice. And just as a reminder, which hopefully everybody knows this, but each tribe is an independent sovereign nation, so they each have a very loud voice, right, in Congress. So yeah, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, but Louis, I guess I'm reaching the end of my coffee cup and losing steam here, but I do appreciate that. And so yeah, sometimes there are disagreements. They don't always agree.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we have hit 2 o'clock, and I want to be conscious of Sarah's time. She's already given us quite a bit. So if you have other questions, you can either email them to me, or if you're a student registered in the course, you can post them in the Slack channel, and we'll keep the conversation going there. Please join me in thanking Sarah one more time for spending her afternoon with us. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Everyone, stay safe and have a great rest of your day. Oh, thanks for the claps. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you.